So we have something at 88 called From Seashells to Satoshis, where we need to tell everybody to start from the very beginning. So over 300 years, we started bartering. So I had a couple bags of oranges. I wanted to trade them for sheep, and the guy told me, you know what, can you give me 1 sheep for 3 bags of oranges? And I bartered that way. But then eventually I got 1 sheep and I just wanted 1 apple. And it was a problem because I wanted to eat 1 apple. How am I supposed to trade 1 sheep for 1 apple? It becomes a problem because I can't cut the sheep into pieces when I still want it alive. So we moved, that was the bartering system, and it worked for a small period of time, and we were in small villages and stuff like that. But it then moved on to a point where we had shells. Like, we use shells, we use spices. These were all mediums of exchange, where it was surplus in one area and a deficit in the other area. So for example, if I had to use spices, spices were very prominent and surplus in India. But if I were to go to Europe, spices weren't very surplus, and they were actually valued in the United Kingdom or Europe at the time. So what happened was, when I came to I came to Europe with a bunch of spices, oftentimes I could take advantage of how Europeans valued spices at those times. But for me, spices were cheap. And eventually people realized that in certain areas, things were valued very differently. So these mediums of exchange were valued very differently. West Africa actually has a history of using shells, and India, or in East Asia, shells are very prominent. So what happened was, these Indians were coming across to West Africa, and the British were coming across to West Africa and taking advantage of African lands using shells. And the Africans couldn't realize how come they got so much shells, but they just didn't realize that it's a surplus in their area and it's valuable, and a deficit in the West African area. So this becomes a problem. So in fact, the term "shell out some money" actually originated from there. We also moved on to salt. Salt, the word salary originated from salt as well, because we used to get paid in salt. So that's just a good history behind it. Eventually, though, we found bronze and copper underground, and we started figuring out that, Jesus, these things are great to use for mediums of exchange because they're hard to get. They're surpluses in every area. We started using these things. Then we started using silver. We found silver underground. We figured out that silver is a really good medium of exchange. And eventually, by the way, I'm skipping over many years at this moment in time, but just for my time purposes, we found gold underground. And we say, damn, gold is the thing. So we started making gold coins. We started giving gold coins to everybody. Everyone had gold bars and so on. We started moving around with these things. And just to give you an understanding of why gold is so important and why gold is the most elite precious metal you can find in history. If I had the biggest gold mine in the world, and I had 100% capacity, and I started mining at 100% capacity, I would only move the needle of gold stock in the world by 0.04%. Now let's say, for example, even if I were to double the capacity of that mine, I don't know how I would do it, but just for theoretical purposes, let's say I doubled the capacity of that mine and running at 200%. I would only increase the gold stock ratio in the world by 0.07%. Meaning the supply and the demand, the surplus and the deficit never meets in equilibrium, which means that the gold price will always stay constant and will always rise higher than it actually is, because there will always be more demand than there is surplus. Simple economics, right? So we moved on to gold, and we started moving around with gold bars, gold coins. We started putting people's faces into these gold coins and so on. And eventually what had happened was, as geographically the world was expanding, we were moving away from villages into countries, from countries into global trade. We realized that we can't carry these gold coins or these gold bars everywhere because it's super heavy and it's super difficult and super inconvenient. So we started giving them to people on benches, actual benches. These people actually had a service where you could give these gold coins to people on benches, and they'd give you a note, a promissory note with a stamp. Now just notice the word promissory note. It was a promissory note to say, I promise you that you have, X has 3 gold coins with me and I'm keeping it in safekeeping. So instead of going to, when I wanted to buy a cart or I wanted to buy some oranges or whatever the case may be, I didn't have to go fetch my gold coins. I gave this person a promissory note, which obviously was able to subdivide. So it was proof that I actually had gold reserves lying somewhere. The reason why I say bench is because the word bank originates from bench, because these people used to sit on benches. So like Standard Bank, all you guys, they originated from these places called benches. So we started with, and eventually these banks created institutions, and these institutions became larger and larger. And the central bank, which is the central authority that originated from that time, basically gave these promissory notes, which is fiduciary money. And as you can see, a $20 in gold coin payable to the bearer on demand. So this dollars was actually a promissory note, just more institutionalized at that point in time. It was backed by thing. Eventually, in 1971, in the Bretton Woods, Nixon dropped the gold standard. What that means is the dollar or the fiat system or the promissory note was no longer backed by gold. Why? Because at Nixon's time in 1971, it was after the World War, and they needed more funding to increase fixation, other things, and so on. And he dropped the gold standard because, why do you have to drop the gold standard? Because if there's more gold, if there's more promissory notes in the economy than there is gold in reserves, that becomes a problem. So you can't stick to the gold standard. So he moved over to the petrodollar. But the reason why he moved over to the petrodollar was simply to increase the surplus demand of the dollar at the time, which means increase the US hegemony over the world economy over time. So, which is now known as also the SWIFT system, which is basically the interbank change. When we transfer money from here to overseas, we use the SWIFT system. What that means is we have to buy dollars in order to interact with the international exchange global trade system in the world today. And that's been going on for years. But also this means that the money that was dropped by the gold was actually fiat money. And fiat money is basically money that has been printed and created out of nothing. Literally, in Genesis, fiat means let there be light. Fiat lux means let there be light. And fiat ex nihilo, which means that light, value, like the dollar, value like money, was actually created out of nothing. Nothing means anything to the dollar except your trust in the dollar. Nothing means anything to the rand except your trust in the rand. I know these banks are going to argue with me on this, definitely, but it's an arguable case, but that's currently what's happening. It's actually created out of nothing, and these money supply, this is just a quote by Thomas Jefferson. When these institutions started becoming bigger institutions, he actually debuckled the money creation and the increase of money supply in the economy just out of nothing. He actually believed it was one of the highest criminal things anyone can do. And he also related it to religious texts which banned usury and so on. Anyways, so just to give you a bit of an understanding of money creation works, if you deposit $1,000 in, it's much more complex than this. I'm simplifying it, so before the banks come after me, I am simplifying it. But basically, if you deposit $1,000 into the bank, it keeps a certain amount of reserves and eventually loans out $900. So basically, there's $1,900 in the economy now, but there's only $1,000 actual money. And then it gets loaned out again, and there's reserves put aside, and then it's $2,400, $2,400, and worth $1,000 in the bank in actual money terms. And then it gets loaned out again, so you get $3,400, but there's only $1,000. So this thing gets loaned out multiple times, and it goes on and on and on and on and on. And this is the idea of money creation. So it increases the money surplus in the economy, which actually, so this is how it works. So the central bank issues money to the commercial bank. The commercial bank gives low interest rates to the general public to do amazing things as well. And then it creates more money supply in the system. But this is what we are talking about from the very beginning, which is surplus, deficit, supply, and demand. when there's more surplus of something in the economy, the value of that something corrodes, okay? So basically, when there's more money supply in the economy, this is what we call inflation in modern day economics, but your money is basically corroding over time due to the increase of the money supply. In normal economic terms, if you were to go search it on the internet, your money that you're earning is corroding about 3 to 6% in South Africa per year, sometimes 7%. However, in 2000, the Big Mac was 8 Rand. If you went to go buy the Big Mac from McDonald's, it was 8 Rand. In, just check my notes over here. In 2010, it was 18 Rand 50. In 2020, it was 33 Rand 50. And in 2025, right now, as it stands, is 51 Rand 90. Where it started 25 years ago was 8 Rand 50. That's a 548% increase, which means that it increased 24% a year. So although economics and inflation tells you that it's sitting between 3 and 6%, sometimes the devaluation of your currency, because it's in the central bank reserve, South African Reserve Bank hands, actually corrodes over time. It's actually looking at corroding about 20% a year of your purchasing power, the purchasing power index. So all of this is arguable, all of this is dependent, but money certainly needs an upgrade. Why does money need an upgrade? Because it's the medium of exchange of how you guys interact with the world. You guys literally earn money, it's your medium of exchange, and why should it be part of a central authority? Why should a central authority regard or hold or even control this aspect of how money is created and how money is valued? That means none of you actually have control of the corrosion of your money. So every time you earn a certain amount, it corrodes over time by you doing absolutely nothing. So money needs an upgrade. And how we upgrade money is these three things. This is 88 standard of these three things that money needs, which is the saleability across space. The reason for this is how easily money can be transferred geographically. We live in a global world order. The components of this computer, the components of my phone, these desks, were probably in high chance not made here or made with components that were not made here. We live in a global world order where different things come from different places at instant speeds. So we definitely need that. We need saleability across time. So we have the problem of corrosion in our current fiat money. How can we have an intrinsic money valuation system that doesn't corrode over time and actually increases over time? So for example, actually I'll go into it later rather than now. I don't want to go into it now. And then saleability across scales. The ability, so the promissory note gave us an unbelievable ability, which was to subdivide the gold coin into so many different units so that I could buy a cappuccino. I couldn't buy a cappuccino with a gold coin, so that was a problem. So money needs an upgrade, right? So just to go for saleability across space, as we know, money should move like email. In 2025, money should generally move like email. Currently, if I want to send money abroad via the SWIFT system, which is the natural exchange unit to send money abroad, it takes at least 1 to 3 days, sometimes even 5 days, and different intermediaries, authorized FSPs, like banks across the world, take different chunks of your small chunks of these different things. So when you send $1,000, $10 is gone. You wanted to send $1,000 of your money, but $10 is gone. For services, they call it, but let's just leave it at that. So anyways, gold is too heavy to send across space, and banks charge fees and have limits as well, something like that. So this is a cool chart which I've just put together. Bitcoin is blue, so the transaction cost is extremely low compared to anything else. Cross-border ease is almost instant. The portability, it sits literally right here. Transfer speed is lower than stablecoins. Stablecoins is another digital asset, but I put it here just so you can have some references. And censorship resistance, as you know, with sanctions, this, that, where we can, where we can't send money, is actually dictated not by us. So we can't send our money a certain place at a certain time if it's not liked by certain people. So this is actually very, very prominent in the modern day political era, which is censorship resistant. Gold, obviously, it's extremely censorship resistant, but the portability, transaction cost because of vaults and custody is a problem. Cross-border ease is almost non-existent, and transfer speed is obviously non-existent because there's no speed to the transfer of gold. And then you have the digital fiat, which is your normal rands. So portability is great because it can live on a digital ecosystem like Discovery or Standard Bank, and it has a transaction cost that's relatively low but takes a little bit of more chunks. Cross-border ease is a little bit difficult. You have to have foreign exchange controls, all of these different types of things, which are there for very good reasons, by the way, of which I don't want to go into because it's extremely long, but let's just say it started pre-apartheid times. And then you have transfer speeds, which are extremely low because it goes via the SWIFT network and via the banks, and then they take chunks of each of your money. Also, this includes the people, this person wants to get admitted. This includes the people that, for example, are from Botswana, Zimbabwe, Zambia, Kenya, Nigeria, who are sitting here and want to send money home to their families. When they send money home to their families via these different networks, it could be the banks, or it can be mobile money, it could be anything, they either charge 5 to 8% for higher transactions, so that's $5,000, $3,000 or more. But if you go lower than that, it can actually go all the way up to 30%, just to send money home to your family, your money home to your family. So, and there was nothing wrong because we didn't have the technological things to have a transparent system over time. However, now we do, but we'll go into that later. So saleability across time, we need a money that doesn't corrode over time. Fiat obviously loses its value with its creation. Gold is solid. So as you can see, over time since 2010, the yellow one, which is gold, has currently actually stayed very constant. The US dollar has dropped. It's still 2024, so you'll actually see it drop even more. I didn't realize why I didn't put the rand in here, but anyways, the Argentinian peso is actually a good example of monetary inflation and bad thing. And then Bitcoin is basically the purchasing power of Bitcoin has just extremely skyrocketed since 2010. Again, I want to go into this a little bit later as well. And then scales. So gold can't buy a cappuccino, but Visa, the settlement layer, or MasterCard, can't easily settle, which is the settling mechanism for most of your credit cards or most of your debit cards. They can't settle a R1 billion deal instantly over time. It's literally kind of impossible to get through to that. So what Bitcoin does, it subdivides from 1 Bitcoin into 100 million units, where I can buy a cappuccino for 0.0001, but I can also send over R1 billion over the Bitcoin network instantly, transparent, secure, not central, and with the same amount of fees I would have paid for my cappuccino. Just, those 100 million units are called Satoshis, by the way. So 1 unit is called 1 Satoshi. That's why we started from Seashells to Satoshis. Okay, so this is just the milestones of money of where we've come to. So gold and silver is extremely heavy and hard to divide. The crypto responds to that. By the way, there are multiple different blockchain networks. There are multiple different types of cryptocurrencies. But just for the sake of this current discussion, I'm only going to be focusing on Bitcoin. Has a 21 million cap. So meaning in the entire existence of Bitcoin, you will only have a 21 million cap. Nobody is in charge of that. The US is not in charge of that. The South African government is not in charge of that. It's hard-coded into the internal software of the Bitcoin network, which is immutable. It can't be changed. It can't be altered. And the reason why it can't be altered is because it sits on something called cryptographic technology, which can only be solved by mathematical equations. So it's super transparent and super secure. This is just a technological advancement of the current age. And these things, the reason why it's called over the blockchain network is because it works in blocks. Every block is connected to the next block, and you can't get one transaction to the next without these computers all around the world, in these networks all around the world, solving these cryptographic functions to make a transaction as secure as it is. It still doesn't belong to anybody, and people get rewarded. Like, for example, if I have a mining system, I get rewarded for securing the network. So it's completely decentralized. It belongs to everyone. It's the democratization of money. Think of Uber. Instead of a taxi company owning all the taxis and the taxi guys paying rent, Uber is given the money, given the power to peer-to-peer networks. I can have an Uber myself using my own car so I can earn money. This is basically democratizing the future of money and giving money peer-to-peer. Anyways, for paper money, it's easy to fake or devalue. Obviously, we've already moved away from paper money. Most of us have. And then the supply in crypto is transparent and limited. Banks and cards, I've already went over this. Fees, fraud, and control. They control your money, where it goes, how it goes, where it goes, what fees. But crypto responds with a peer-to-peer 24/7. Can you believe banks actually have holidays? You have to wait to move your money. It's actually kind of ridiculous. But peer-to-peer 24/7 action with no middleman. And then mobile money. So mobile money is unbelievable. It's probably one of the greatest inventions. Like neobanks, time bank, all of these things are great. But what it is, it's basically a monkey using all this like heavy manual machinery, and there's like a magic system that goes on top that makes the UI look really insane and really cool when all the stuff they're dealing with. So they deal with all like the manual stuff for you, and they give you lower fees and stuff like that, which is really cool because I mean, I use only digital banks. However, it creates vendor dependency. So what that means is we're still reliant on a central authority like PayPal, like Discovery, like all of these things to complete, like Shift, to complete all of these things for us. And they've made it super valuable, super technologically savvy for us. But what's the point? It's like you're not moving the needle of dependency on a central authority. The point is self-custody. So imagine I got a big vault with R1 billion. And say I'm a billionaire and I got R1 billion, and I'm moving this vault with me all the time. Only I've got the keys. That's what self-custody is called. I don't have a custodian like a bank. I don't have a custodian for my gold like a custody vault. Literally, my vault is this with a custody hash key that I keep safe with me manually all the time, and it moves with me manually over time. It's immutable, it's owned by me, and I've got full access all the time. Nobody can see my balances except the network, but nobody knows who you are because it's a hash key. So it wouldn't say, for example, X. It would say X6652, whatever, like a hash key to say that that's your wallet online. Anyways, I don't want to get too technical. But anyways, why it matters in 2025. 63% of all US dollars were printed after 2020, which means that the money supply increased by 63% after 2020. Countries like Russia and Iran are ditching SWIFT and using crypto rails because obviously they're currently in sanctions. And many other countries like Gaza, Palestine, all of these places are actually sending money to their families back home via stablecoins or via digital assets. In addition to that, the largest banks in the world have like JP Morgan, Chase, which we deal with, so 88 deals with JP Morgan Chase, has actually settling now only in stablecoins. So USDC and USDT. US stablecoins is basically a digital currency on the blockchain network that mirrors the dollar, which is a very different discussion from now. And obviously the US just passed a bill to have 400,000 Bitcoin in their treasury. The US government has passed a bill to have 400,000 Bitcoin in their treasury because they believe it's more valuable than gold at this moment in time. I'll repeat that. The US government has literally passed a bill. Anyways, 1.4 billion people in the world don't have a bank account, but they have smartphones. So you're giving freedom to 1.4 billion people in the world, giving them opportunity to interact with global trade at instant speeds, at instant time. They just need a smartphone and a network connection. So I know for maybe some of you, I'm speaking of a dystopian future, but honestly, it's not a dystopian future. More than 10% of our country currently holds Bitcoin. More than 14% of the Americans have Bitcoin. This is currently all this purple is people that are, the populations that are above 8% that are currently holding Bitcoin in their wallets at this moment in time. So it's not a dystopian future, and obviously most companies are now settling in Bitcoin or stable coins with us, 88, and other digital asset services. Just to give you a little bit of overview, I'm nearly finished, but this is the idea of a capped supply of money. The idea of supply and deficit. The Bitcoin supply reaches 21 million, and the inflation rate obviously doesn't exist. And then the fiat money supply actually just corrodes over time. So you can see what your money value will actually do if you just keep money in the bank account. So smart people in the world, so this is actually a philosophical argument. Smart people in the world have always said, I'm going to take my money out of the bank account and buy hard assets. So art, vintage cars, real estate. Those were the smart people, and the dumb people were people who just spent their money and continued to stay poor over time. Now imagine your money, the money that you actually earn, intrinsically itself has value. So intrinsically itself, it's a hard asset. I don't have to spend it. So now the economies are not on short-term gain and consumption. I'm actually thinking about spending my Bitcoin, my 0.1 Bitcoin, because I know tomorrow it's going to be more valued than the fiat. So it's a philosophical argument of changing our lives from short-term gains to long-term value. And this is actually what happens if I keep Bitcoin in my wallet. To give you an example of what happens when I keep Bitcoin in my wallet, there's something in the industry called dollar cost averaging, which is basically compounding investments over time. So like weekly or monthly. So you buy a stock monthly or something, so it compounds over time. At 88, we call this auto stacking. So we have an auto stacking feature that's actually being launched in 2 weeks. Basically, it allows you to buy Bitcoin or a piece of Bitcoin or whatever a week. So depending on your disposable income. So say, for example, if you bought 500 Rand worth of Bitcoin weekly since Jan 2018, that was the lowest point Bitcoin has ever been. It's crashed at that point. Nobody wanted to buy Bitcoin at that point in time. But let's just say if you bought 500 Rand since Jan 2018, you'd be up nearly three times the value. So today, you'd literally be up 3 times the value, even if you started at the worst bumps. So you automatically have a U-curve. This is what we call auto stacking. When you take your disposable income monthly or weekly and you buy a certain hard asset like Bitcoin or like gold, so that in 5 years' time you can become a financially independent human being. Like just to give you an example, 3 times you spent 194,000 over 7 years, but you have a value of 537,000 over 7 years, just by auto stacking and just by holding Bitcoin. If you did that with fiat, you'd lose 15% a year. Just give an example. So just before this, I know most of you use ChatGPT in your classrooms. So I asked ChatGPT, pick one, fiat or Bitcoin, one-word answer, and it picked Bitcoin, actually, so, because it's the smartest LLM model there is. So and like Cloud, Anthropic, you can ask all of them. It'll give you arguments of why Bitcoin is a future value asset. That's the end for me. But just to give you, this is just an ecosystem, the ecosystem that we currently have. We are now 7 years old, and we continue to build bridges. We don't believe that the world will move straight onto digital assets, or what we call on-chain, but we do believe it'll be an interplay between fiat currencies and digital assets. And so we're building the infrastructure and bridges between those two worlds into ecosystems, apps, and just making life just super easy to interact with the digital economy. So that's me and us, 88.